Welcome to Alpha Coding Podcast, an all-access pass to medical coding and billing pro tips that help you start your week off smarter. And now, here is your host, Toni Elhoms.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alpha Coding Podcast series. I am your host, Toni Elhoms. Welcome to episode 59 of the podcast. Today is February 15th, and I just wanted to share some amazing news. So I found out that we are ranked number 1 on FeedSpot's top medical billing and coding podcasts. This is seriously awesome. I can't thank the listeners enough for all of your support and putting us into this top spot with some other amazing podcasts. I'm truly honored and humbled. I pour my heart and soul into this podcast, and I really enjoy putting out this content every single Monday. So thank you for sticking with me. So today we're going to cover a topic that a lot of people struggle with, including myself, but few people actually recognize that they even experience this, and that's imposter syndrome. So I'm going to give you some great pro tips on how to overcome this phenomenon that affects so many people. So before we dive into our topic, it's time for your Monday dose of positivity, the Mindset Monday tip. And it's brought to you by Project Resume. When is the last time you had your resume updated? Your resume is literally your entry ticket to that next great opportunity. Project Resume will design a customized ATS-friendly resume to demonstrate your unique skills and experience. And even better, it's written by coders for coders. Make that investment in yourself today and visit projectresume.net and mention my code ALPHACODING for special pricing. So our Mindset Monday tip is all about the importance of your mindset. So the quote I want to share with you says, "Education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind on how to think." And this quote is so important. It's why I do a Mindset Monday tip every single week. Your mindset is everything. And let's go back down memory lane and think about all of the classes and the things that we learned in school, like algebra and geometry and all of the president's birthdays. When did we actually ever use any of those facts? The majority of you would probably agree with me that these types of facts and figures have not been fundamental to your life. But yet society puts so much emphasis on the education, going to college, getting the master's, getting the PhD, getting all of these degrees, but not a lot of emphasis on skills and thinking and mindset. And it blows my mind how backwards this is, because your mind can either be your greatest ally, your greatest asset, or your worst enemy. It's all about calibrating the right mindset to ensure your success. You either control your mind or your mind controls you. So you have to be in the driver's seat. And just like the quote says, the training of the mind to think is so much more valuable than the facts and figures you're going to learn. That's the real education. That's the real life skills that you need to be focused on. And it's so important that you control your mind and your thoughts. Don't let your mind control you. So today we're going to cover my top 10 pro tips for overcoming imposter syndrome. My good friend Victoria Mole over at Contempo Coding, she has an awesome YouTube channel, awesome podcasts as well. She drops new episodes on her podcast every other Friday. She did a previous episode about managing imposter syndrome, and it really inspired me to do my own episode because this is something that I also struggle with. So imposter syndrome is basically the inability to internalize and accept your own success. This is a very real phenomenon, and it's so real that most people don't even realize that they're experiencing it. It's this voice inside your head that's telling you you're a fraud. Someone's going to find out that you don't know all of the things that you say you know. You're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be in this room. You don't belong at this table. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. So somebody that suffers from imposter syndrome is going to attribute their successes, their accomplishments to luck, that they were in the right place at the right time, that they knew somebody that gave them an opportunity, and they always feel like people around them are going to find out. So imposter syndrome can be very debilitating. I personally struggle with imposter syndrome, and I would say it was probably at its peak when I first started my business as an entrepreneur. entrepreneur, I constantly felt like people are going to find out that I really don't know how to run a business, that my employees were going to think that I didn't know what I was doing, that clients were going to ask for their money back once they found out that I was a fraud. All of these crazy fears. And I think everybody struggles with this on some level, but so many people don't even realize that they're experiencing it. I didn't know what imposter syndrome was until several years ago when I really started to do deep exploration into personal development. And to all my coding nerds, because I know you're going to ask, there is not a code for imposter syndrome. It's actually not an official diagnosis in the DSM-5 manual, but it's a very real thing and a form of intellectual self-doubt, and often accompanied with anxiety, depression. It can even manifest into panic attacks. So I want to give you some great pro tips on how to overcome imposter syndrome, because I think so many people struggle with it but don't know how to combat it. And this brings me to my pro tip number 1. Imposter syndrome works in cycles. So it kind of comes in ebbs and flows. And you'll find that you have really bad imposter syndrome if something big is coming up. Let's say you're going to take an important test, you have an important deadline, you're doing a job interview. That's when you're really going to see your imposter syndrome heighten. And this is a vicious cycle for high performers, because if you're constantly doing big projects, taking on new clients, doing these huge speaking engagements, TED Talks, these are going to be the times when your imposter syndrome is going to be through the roof. And the reason why I say it's very cyclic is that you will experience all of these emotions prior to the event. And then after you've gotten through it, let's say you came out on the other side successfully. And then once you come out on the other side of that experience, let's say you are successful, then a lot of times people with imposter syndrome believe that all of that stress, all of that anxiety, all of that extra effort is what propelled them to be successful. And so then it just perpetuates into this endless cycle of imposter syndrome overload, where every time you have an important event or an important project and you go through all of this imposter syndrome, and then you start to believe that all of your successes are due to all of that self-torture. So it's a very vicious cycle. And the first step to taking control of that cycle is being aware that you're experiencing imposter syndrome, and then developing effective coping strategies to make sure that this is not something that is debilitating. Pro tip number 2, recognize feelings associated with imposter syndrome in yourself. We all deal with imposter syndrome. I think every single person on this planet does. We all experience self-doubt. I think that's just part of being a human. But the first step to taking control is being aware. And so many people don't even realize that this is a thing because they haven't been able to recognize those feelings within themselves. So are you somebody that internalizes constructive feedback? Are you someone that internalizes setbacks? Meaning you take it personal that you didn't succeed, and then you look at yourself as inadequate, like you're not good enough. You're not the right person for that position. You're not the right leader for your team. Whatever your situation may be, if you are somebody that feels like you're an imposter in your own life, then it's time for you to take action and really get intimately familiar with those feelings in yourself and start to recognize when you feel those feelings. And just know that there's nothing wrong with you because you experience imposter syndrome. A lot of people experience this. Most people are not self-aware enough to even know that they're dealing with it because their subconscious mind is constantly playing this negative programming and they're on autopilot. They're not conscious enough to even realize that it's going on. So the fact that you're taking the time to recognize these feelings within yourself is going to help you significantly in overcoming imposter syndrome. Pro tip number 3, separate feelings from facts. So emotions tend to drive the bus. When we get emotional, when we get hypercharged, our feelings can feel like reality when in fact they're just our own feelings. I'll give you an example. How many times have you thought, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody deals with these moments, but you have to be able to separate the fact that that's a feeling and not a fact. It's not your reality. But people that deal with imposter syndrome tend to blend the two and can't see the difference between their own feelings and the actual facts. So you have to be able to separate the two. It's not always easy, especially in the heat of the moment. So sometimes you need a day or two to process things, and then you're able to analyze the situation and look back and see, okay, these were my feelings in the moment. These were the actual facts. And that process can be very enlightening. It makes it even more difficult if you're somebody that deals with anxiety, because anxiety often is accompanied with all of these racing thoughts. And it can be really hard to categorize those thoughts and feelings and emotions. So the ability to reframe your thoughts and isolate your feelings from the actual facts are going to be instrumental in your journey to overcoming imposter syndrome. Pro tip number 4, imposter syndrome and perfectionism are like salt and pepper. They go hand in hand. So I would say 99% of the time, people that struggle with imposter syndrome are also perfectionists. And this will typically lead to 2 responses. So that person is either going to procrastinate, they're going to put off doing the project, doing the preparation, doing the assignment until the very last minute when they have all of the pressure of the world on their shoulders, because they have this underlying fear that they don't have what it takes to get the job done, that they're not going to do it to that high standard. And this type of self-sabotage can have negative consequences on that person. Even though they're a high performer, even though they're successful, they're self-sabotaging themselves by constantly procrastinating. And then that second response with perfectionism and imposter syndrome is that they either procrastinate or they over-prepare. They spend way too much time preparing. And then they get through the actual event and they think, okay, well, the reason why I came out on the other side is because I panicked and over-prepared and spent 50 hours preparing for something that I really probably should have just spent 5 hours preparing for. So it's a bit of both extremes in that you procrastinate, but then you over prepare. But the thing about perfectionists and people that really struggle with imposter syndrome is that they really do care about the quality of their work. They care about their reputation. They really go above and beyond that extra mile, always striving for excellence. So they really do care. They're just dealing with both extremes of being a perfectionist and also dealing with imposter syndrome. Pro tip number 5, identify your imposter syndrome triggers. So they're going to be different for everybody, but if you have an important test coming up, maybe you're doing a certification exam, maybe you're speaking at a conference or a big event, maybe you're preparing for a job interview, a second interview, third interview. Moral of the story, if you have something important, if you have something big coming up, expect your imposter syndrome to be next level. So know your triggers and be hyper aware of the imposter syndrome that's associated with that trigger so you can recognize it, be better prepared for it, and then have tools and resources in place to navigate through that process. Pro tip number 6, beware of manipulators. So you should be aware of this anyway, but specifically if you deal with imposter syndrome, they're going to be people in your family. They're going to be people that you think are your friends, coworkers, bosses that are going to see that you deal with imposter syndrome, that you struggle with self-doubt, and that you really care about what you do to the point where they're going to try to exploit that. So these types of people that are very manipulative are going to try to make you feel like you don't belong, like you're inferior, like you're not good enough, like you don't have the right experience, or you're not qualified for that position because of your personality, that you should never apply for a promotion because you're not management material. You're going to hear all sorts of things in your life depending on where you're at in your career. I've had so many people over my career tell me that I wouldn't make it, that I wasn't the right fit, that I wasn't polished enough, that I wasn't management material. Guess what? That was their opinion, and I continued to persevere regardless of what their opinion was. But that's not to say that it didn't get in my head, it didn't affect my self-esteem, because at different points in my career, it absolutely did. You have to be able to spot these people. They are master manipulators, and if they know that you struggle with imposter syndrome, they're going to try to manipulate the situation for their own gain. And so you have to be hyper aware of this. Pro tip number 7, develop a healthy relationship with failure. We all fail. It's part of everybody's journey. So I don't know why they taught us this in school, but it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. We were taught in school that you should never get below a certain grade, that you should always follow the directions. So the important thing here is that your perspective is everything. How you perceive, how you react to failure, how you react to mistakes says everything about your resiliency. So you want to develop a healthy relationship with failure. You want to acknowledge that it's part of your journey, just like it's part of everybody else's journey. And it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to gain perspective, to gain insight. So instead of asking yourself, why am I such a failure? You need to ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? What can I take away from this so that the next time I can be that much better? Pro tip number 8, control your inner dialogue. I've said this before and I'll say it again because it's 100% true. You are in control of that inner dialogue. Autopilot is real. Most people are not even aware of their inner dialogue, the voice that's constantly playing in their head, that's driving the bus every single day in terms of what they do, what they eat, what they think, where they go, when they go. And this constant state of being on autopilot makes them unaware of that inner dialogue. So being constantly mindful of that inner dialogue and that conversation that's going on in your head can be really instrumental in overcoming imposter syndrome. Sometimes you have to tell that inner voice to shut up. You are good enough. You are smart enough. You are resourceful enough. You're going to figure it out. You're going to get it done. And the crazy thing is, no amount of success and no amount of money is going to change that inner dialogue. That's something that you have to work really hard within yourself to change. You have to control that voice. You have to be mindful of that voice. Controlling that inner dialogue is everything when it comes to overcoming imposter syndrome. Pro tip number 9, leverage visuals to remind yourself of your accomplishments and expertise. This pro tip is huge for me all throughout my office, my home office, my corporate office. I have articles that I've contributed to, articles that I've written, my certifications, testimonials that I've gotten from people over the years, from clients, places I've spoken at. And I've spoken at some really cool places. I've been an international speaker. I've spoken at events that were approved for CLEs, for CMEs. I have done some huge things, but even I need to be reminded of those huge accomplishments and all of the expertise that I have. So those visual cues and reminders can be really impactful when you're in the thick of imposter syndrome and you just need a reminder of how amazing you are. Pro tip number 10, share your imposter experiences with others. So don't feel shame to talk about this. So the key to overcoming imposter syndrome is talking about it. Talk to your trusted friends, your trusted colleagues, talk to your inner circle about your experiences with imposter syndrome. When you share it with other people, you're going to find that those people also experience imposter syndrome. And that sense of community just gives you a whole new perspective. There is so much shame around imposter syndrome, and it's something that we need to get loud about. We need to break the silence. We all suffer from self-doubt. None of us are exempt, but the key is that you can't let your doubts control your actions. You have to develop those coping strategies so that you can ultimately overcome imposter syndrome. So grab a pen and paper to summarize my top 10 pro tips for overcoming imposter syndrome. Number 1, imposter syndrome works in cycles. Number 2, recognize feelings associated with imposter syndrome in yourself. Number 3, separate feelings from facts. Number 4, imposter syndrome and perfectionism are like salt and pepper. Number 5, identify your imposter syndrome triggers. Number 6, beware of manipulators. Number 7, develop a healthy relationship with failure. Number 8, control your inner dialogue. Number 9, leverage visuals to remind yourself of your accomplishments and expertise. Number 10, share your imposter syndrome experiences with others. So it's time for this week's coding pro tip, and it's brought to you by Contempo Coding, which is an on-demand educational resource provider created for coders by coders. They specialize in affordable coding certification prep courses to help you accelerate in your career. Right now, they're offering an exclusive special to Alpha Coding Podcast listeners, and that's $125 off the Certified Risk Adjustment Coding Prep course when you order through our affiliate website. This prep course has a 100% pass rate, by the way. Visit our website, alphacodingexperts.com, and head over to the Deals and Discounts tab for a link to take advantage of this absolute steal of a deal. If you have a coding-related question and would like it to be featured in one of our coding pro tips, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. So this week's coding pro tip comes to us from Texas. Hi, Toni. I love the podcast and I look forward to Mondays every single week because of your show. I have a question about coding on units for physical therapy. We have physical therapists that like to bill for multiple units, let's say 2 units of manual therapy with CPT code 97140, but their documentation only supports 20 minutes of service time. Can I report 2 units if they didn't meet the full time requirements? And can I use rollover time from other PT services to count towards the manual therapy time? Please help. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your support of the podcast. Physical therapy time-based coding can be really confusing. There's an important rule, it's called the rule of 8s. And if the provider documents a minimum of 8 minutes of activity time for that time-based requirement, then you can report that code. However, when it comes to reporting additional units of that same service, you would need to have 8 minutes above and beyond that first 15 minutes of service time in order to qualify for the second unit. So in this case, you would need to have a minimum of 23 minutes documented of that manual therapy in order to report the second unit. Now, the confusing thing can be the remainder units on the PT codes. So if you have other time-based PT codes, in some instances, you can take the overage from those other units and add them to the service that is short on their minutes. However, this is really circumstantial and it requires a certain number of minutes beyond that first threshold in order to be able to combine the units. So the coding for the remainders on those additional units really just depends on the type of PT service, but just as a general tip, you want to stick with the rule of 8s. Please remember to hit that subscribe button now so you never miss another episode. Also, be sure to drop us a rating and review on iTunes. We really appreciate your support. So this concludes today's episode. Until next week, thank you for listening to the Alpha Coding Podcast. We'll see you next Monday.
For more information about medical coding and billing pro tips, including how to hire alpha coding experts, follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or visit our website at www.alphacodingexperts.com.